How are you? Welcome to the panel on mergers and acquisitions and compliance. We guarantee that it's going to be the best panel of the entire episode. We've been working really hard. I am Valerie Charles. I serve as the Chief Strategy Officer at GAN Integrity. GAN is a tech company, and it's amazing. Before I had this role, I was a white-collar criminal defense attorney at various law firms for many years, traveling all over the world, primarily with FCPA actions. I then went in-house to a small company, and I built a program from the ground. After doing that, I was exhausted and thought it would be fun to make a left turn to tech. So that's me. I am here with a fantastic panel, and for this particular topic, I don't think we could have gotten more interesting people that have more interesting stories. We have Patricia Allen from SNC-Lavalin sitting right next to me. In the middle, Tom Fenning from Bayer, and Natalia Shahada on the end from Technip. So I think what I'll do is just let them tell a little bit more about themselves, and then possibly also introduce some of the bigger M&A stories that they're going to go into more detail about, to kind of give the framework about why we have such a superstar panel.
So I'll start. My name is Patricia Allen. I'm the head of the Integrity Program Office of SNC-Lavalin. SNC-Lavalin is an engineering construction company, and yes, we are lots in the news right now in Canada because of some political issues that has nothing really to do with their business right now. But if you have a question about it, I'll answer that later. So I'm here because SNC-Lavalin has grown through acquisition in the past couple of years. In July 2017, we've acquired Atkins, that is an engineering design project management firm based out of the UK with 18,000 employees. And in 2018, we also created a co-company with ABB, which right now has 1,000 employees, so in just a couple of months. So those are my experience. My responsibility within the SNC-Lavalin is to ensure that everyone that is new gets within our integrity program. So, from gap analysis of what do they have versus what we have, what are the best practice, up to obviously making sure that in 12 months of time, everyone is respectful of our integrity program. Thomas?
So, guten Morgen, which means good morning in German. Hi everybody, my name is Tom Fennig. I'm the Global Head of Compliance for Bayer AG, based in beautiful Leverkusen. Nobody has ever been there in this room, I'm sure, north of Cologne. I am heading essentially all the compliance programs for the enterprise. Bayer is known most likely because of our over-the-counter products, aspirin, Alka-Seltzer, Claritin, you name it. But it's only one of 4 divisions, so the other 3 are prescription medicines, agriculture nowadays, and animal health. So we call ourselves a life sciences company with the motto "Science for Better Life." I'm a lawyer, both in the US as well as in Germany, and Bayer has been going through some transformational changes over the last 15 years. If you do the numbers, we acquired and divested assets roughly 135 billion euros, which means a lot of change, a lot of challenges, but also obviously a lot of opportunities. I've been with Bayer for 15 years now. I started in 2003, and just 2 years later we acquired Schering, which is not to be confused with Schering Plough in the US, but Schering in Germany for 17 billion euros. Before that we acquired the Roche OTC business. We acquired the Merck OTC business 4 years ago. We carved out quite a bit of assets, including our entire Bayer Material Science business, now also an DEX company in Germany. And lately, as you know, media coverage is not news to us either. We acquired a US-based agricultural company for 66 billion euros, dollars, and that was the second largest corporate takeover in Germany ever. So I hope that I can share a bit of insights from that 15-year experience with you guys.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everyone. My name is Natalia, and I am here on behalf of TechnipFMC. We just inaugurated our 3rd year. We are the product of a merger that closed in January of 2017 of Technip, previously a French headquartered engineering, procurement, and construction company dedicated to principally the oil and gas sector, and FMC Technologies, previously a U.S. headquartered oil field services manufacturing company. We are a company, we proudly say, unique and one of its kind. We are headquartered in the UK, so we brought France and the United States together, and we decided to be British. That decision was made prior to the Brexit vote. We are traded on the New York Stock Exchange. We are traded on the Euronext in Paris. There is no other company that has that, shall I say, regulatory or trading footprint. We were a merger with an objective specific to the subsea oil and gas space, to provide synergies that both legacy companies had in that sector of the oil and gas market, and a merger purpose that we think is having great success, but opportunities also where there were legacy elements of both companies that did not relate per se to the merger purpose. And so how do you then make a new family feel that it is one is integrated from a culture perspective, that everybody matters, that every line of business matters, whether it was merger purpose intended or sustaining business intended, and lots of things I'd like to tell you about with respect to how we're navigating our compliance program.
Perfect. So we theoretically are going to have 3 sections. We're going to talk first about culture, and then we'll see if we end up having time for the other 2 sections, because culture is such a big issue here. And we can have questions, I think, after each section rather than holding everything until the very end. So, whether or not the acquired or merged entity is outside of the geographic location, there are major, cultural considerations, just business culture aside from country culture. So I think the initial question would just be, I guess, to talk about what aspects of corporate culture have been raised, and how did you handle leadership in that area.
So SNC-Lavalin, just to give you a bit of context so you can understand, so we've been debarred by the World Bank a couple of years ago, so we still have our debarment that will be technically ending in 4 years now, so I stopped counting. So obviously we need to follow and respect our remediation agreement that we have with the World Bank. So when we bought Atkins a year and a half ago, obviously they technically had some issues in the States, but very little. They did not really know anything about what it is to be debarred and so on. So the shift from the culture was very hard for them, as their program was very high level. It was just basic stuff as a code of conduct, one training that they had to do once. They did not have to do annual training and so on. And we come with a full integrity program, with tons of training, with target audience on, how to deal with business partners, gift hospitality, annual code of conduct certification that they need to do in just 4 weeks, a month. So we came in and they thought, oh my God, what is this, right? So and then it's the question, are we doing this only because we've been debarred, or are we really doing this because it's part of our values? So when we started this adventure, I would say, for us it was really very focusing on this is part of our values now. So yes, we're doing that because we have that agreement, but we're actually doing that because it's really part of our values, and it's really important for everyone. So we had, I would say, a bit of hurdles at the beginning on trying to explain the context of and why we needed to do these things and why it was so important for us. Versus the daily business activities that they were doing, that they were really focusing on. I would say that even we had actually just 12 months to make sure that we integrate them within our program. What's interesting is that it's not because you have 12 months and then after that you can say, oh, it's done and everything is working fantastically. It isn't. So it's a really continuum process that we have.
So a couple of points. If you go through that many acquisitions like us, I think one point is very important, that you have a stable framework in place for your workforce to be guided through that change. If you're not firm what your values are as the acquired company, it's going to be very critical and difficult to maintain those positions. So to Bayer, 7 years ago, we, with the leadership of the board, established a four-corner framework for culture based upon an acronym called LIFE. And those four letters stand for leadership, integrity, there was a bit of a fight internally whether this should stand for integrity or innovation. So we won that fight, fortunately. Flexibility and efficiency. And this is also based or embedded in our P&P ratings and bonus payouts. So that framework is a given, and wherever we acquire a company, that is the baseline. But to start with, below the life values are what we call behavioral anchors, and they drive culture in Bayer as well. There are also four, and I memorized them now, but they are really, I think, not that difficult. Trust, collaboration. That's really a key, both in the company as well as then acquired companies. Customer focus, I think everybody would agree to that, and I really love the fourth one, which is experimentation. So being innovative, challenging the status quo, and really trying to be a leader in all the areas that we are, operational excellence, so to speak. So to us, it is critically important that the board, that all the leaders who are steering an acquisition of firm, that these are going to be the values of the acquired company as well. We do assessments. Of course, we look at the code of conduct together with HR. We also run some surveys to generate data points where there are differences. As you can imagine, being a German company of 160 years of age, there is perhaps the tendency of some to be a bit more traditional in their management approach. So if you acquire a US company, there may be a bit of a change, rather than just planning and then thinking it through and discussing it ad nauseum, doing it, executing it. And having this insight for both sides is critically important, because I also want to make sure that the acquired company, and this has been a failure in a lot of big corporate acquisitions, is not feeling to be dragged across the table. So it is really important, in my view, that leadership also approaches such an acquisition with an open mindset, clearly also expressing the willingness to learn from each other, to blend perhaps the best of the best, to not be seen, and I have to make reference to the Daimler-Chrysler merger, which is actually a bit scary, because it was called merger in heaven, and that ultimately turned out to be a merger in hell. And we don't want to repeat that, obviously. So really having this mindset of, we are coming in as the acquirer, but we listen to you, and we take the time to see what you may be doing better than us. And I think that's really also a key driver to establish a culture where the acquired company buys into your values, buys into the mission, and ultimately drives the business jointly and not in a detrimental way.
So leveraging many common points that Tom just made, TechnipFMC is a true merger. And as a merger, it's a marriage. And a marriage, to plan for success, requires significant, thoughtful planning. And we deemed it a merger of total equals. It did not matter the culture legacy, it did not matter the number of employees, it did not matter the size and revenue of book of business of the two partners who are coming together on a new life journey. And it's a balance of how to honor the extraordinary legacy, sophistication, technical prowess of the brands of two parties coming together in a marriage. So our management team recognized the significance of what to say to the marketplace and to our employees on day one. So day one, January 17th, 2017, we issued the Code of Business Conduct for TechnipFMC on the first day, so that everyone felt
on day one, we were proceeding down the path of celebration of that marriage with a unified message. On day two, management commenced a stakeholder engagement that took a planned 5 months, the output of which would be the decision of what the core values and foundational beliefs of the family would be. And those were decided to be integrity, respect, safety and quality. We are in oil and gas, and it is an industry with significant challenge, so we must honor safety and quality. And sustainability, our role vis-a-vis the planet, our communities, and our stakeholders as we operate in the challenging hydrocarbon market. So I'm not suggesting that the first months and year or two of a marriage were perfect. We were getting to know one another, our likes and our dislikes and our patterns and our language. But I would just encourage the thoughtfulness and the criticality of listening to what should be the methods of the future. And so our mantra as well was to bring together the best of the best. And uniquely in the compliance space, Technip and FMC individually had their separate compliance programs, but proceeded through a course of history that were quite different. And so there were strengths uniquely that enabled us to bring the program together where there wasn't a particular heavy level of overlap. So from that perspective, we were really quite lucky, and it really was bringing best of the best. Now the opportunity, as we celebrate the start of year 3, is the continuous improvement. So we are a learning organization, we are a technology organization, and we pride ourselves on being an innovation organization. And so how do we continue to innovate, to grow, and to continuously improve in the integrity space supported by our compliance program? And that is shedding bureaucracy, which if anybody wants to talk about that offline, that is a passion project of mine. I don't think success in compliance looks like more people and more process is the only tools to a solution path in terms of securing a sustainable integrity-based culture. And so how do we raise the bar? And so I'm a student of that, and I look forward to people's input. That's a bit of what we're navigating now as we carry the journey forward.
And if I just may add, I think whether it is a merger or an acquisition, I would submit to make it successful, it's a quid pro quo, give and take type of equation. So there's pain and pleasure at the end, pre-programmed on both sides. And I want to go a little bit into the pain part also, just to give you some practical ramifications. We did blend functions N-1 to N-4, so board level to 4 levels below, to really identify the best among the best, which ultimately also leads to some consequences on the individual level that may be quite uncomfortable. Lately, we blended the head of law, patents and compliance function in Brazil. It's a huge market for us, especially in the agricultural sector. Essentially, Brazil partially feeds the world, if you will. And the consequence was that I was losing my 21-year friend who has been leading the law, patents and compliance function at the benefit of the incoming colleague. And I work with her fantastically, but it's really a signal to the acquired company also that we are not sticking to our guns, so to speak. We are really utilizing your talent. We are developing your talent, and those signals are extremely powerful, I think, in the success of either mergers or acquisitions.
It's so interesting. From the integrity perspective, we work with companies all around the world, and so I get the kind of unique bird's eye view of the approach to the compliance program generally. And I think that the folks at the table, and certainly the European model, tends to have much more of a strong focus on ethics not just the sort of legal and regulatory issues, but truly viewing the ethics and compliance professionals in the organization as cultural ambassadors. And I think that's something that American CCOs often struggle with. And I'm curious about how that works with HR. Like, do you partner with HR? Do they take cues from you, or you're taking cues from them? Maybe let's talk a little bit about how to partner with the other sort of cultural focused groups.
So one thing is, I think I'm the only one at this table that is not an attorney. So my background is actually HR. My background is HR and mostly in how to manage organizational development. So everything related to cultural change and change management is really important to me. This is something that I like to do, I'm passionate about doing. So obviously coming from HR, obviously I knew that I had to work with HR, and not only HR, but also other stakeholders such as corporate communication, legal, and health and safety group, and so on, just to ensure that we all have the same common goal, as this was not to colonize the new company that we just acquired, right? That was not the purpose. We bought that company because they were so great at what they were doing, and we knew that that was an added value to us as a company. So the best way is to look at, like you said before, what are the best practices that they have? What are the good things that they do? How can we ensure that, we could keep them? And I'm not talking necessarily about people, and I will also say process, like they had great process in place for their due diligence. They had, example, in my case, they had a team in Bangalore. That what we decided is that we look at what they were doing more closely, and we thought this is actually a great idea, so we're actually going to integrate that. Everyone on the team that they had 4 people when we acquired them with the integrity function we decided to keep. Now, working with HR, it is actually sometimes very simple and sometimes very difficult. Because obviously HR has their own goals too, versus example, how do we treat employees? So we came with 2 different sets of employment condition, 2 different sets of how we do manage employees. And I need to say that Atkins was doing actually totally great things, communicating with their employees. Things very simple as using more social media to contact with their employees, something that SNC-Lavalin was not very good at doing. So this is also another part where how can we get to them? They also had Yammer. We did not have Yammer. Had to learn how to use that myself. And using that tool that they were used to, utilize to communicate with their own employees to be able to send a message, send example or values. As you did, we actually did the same exercise. Once we acquired them, we went through an immense survey amongst everyone to say, like, what should be, now that we're all together, what should be the values of our company? So previously to that, SNC-Lavalin had 6 values. We came out of that survey and workshop with 4 values and with integrity part of it. So it's good because that came directly from employees. But then how can you ensure that within your HR process also that culture also is being put into action? So for us, we actually also looked at the performance management process that HR had. And we wanted to ensure that we included our values of now the newborn company together, the values that we had in common, and how can we make sure also to ensure, to assess, evaluate employees on their performance based on those values. So I think that HR is a huge partner in this. Communication should also be a huge partner because one of the things that we found very difficult at the beginning when we bought Atkins is there was one person within their communication team that was not really happy about that change for himself. So obviously each time that we wanted to communicate something, there was a pushback. So then you need to bring that up, making sure that you have the tone at the top, and then sending back the message after.
I would completely echo that. I actually wanted to bring communications into play because we did assessments also on differences in the policy landscape between us and acquired companies. And interestingly, nowadays, quite frankly, corporate codes of conduct are quite identical. I have not come across major differences, and the expectation is there is a German company, very regulated, very antiquated, and they have a code of conduct that's 300 pages, and I can't do anything anymore, and I'm completely paralyzed. Just communicating that no, there is really no difference. They are basically identical twins, and you can continue your business in the same framework, under the same parameters as before, is a key communication that needs to go out very early. Otherwise, you're really going to confuse the acquired folks. On the HR side, I already mentioned the blending, so it's critical that you define what is the expectation in the combined business for the people that you want to retain. So clearly defining the job, and then blending based upon that criteria is something you do together with HR. Also, I mentioned the cultural survey. So the data points they are generating, we want to see them, and we want to analyze them together with HR to see, where do we have perhaps some room for improvement, agility, customer focus, and maybe on the other side, there's also room for improvement. Lastly, a really pragmatic, practical example here. So we have mapped our risk at the universe, and one of the challenges obviously is fairness and respect at work. So that package is steered by the HR function in Legacy Bayer. And making sure that somebody takes ownership and responsibility for that topic in the acquired organization is critical in my view, so that no harassment, is undetected, hopefully, that you have equality in payments, promotions, training assignments, so that there is also buy-in how to treat your workforce, how to establish an open reporting culture in your organization. And that's where we are partnering with HR. And again, one of the first moves was identifying somebody in the acquired company in HR to be what we call the risk area lead for this package, fairness and respect at work, to drive these principles, to drive the controls also that we have put in place in the acquired organizations.
So I agree with everything. I think what I would add from a pure merger context is, because the relationship is completely new, it is a new thing that didn't exist prior to merger, there's an extraordinary emphasis and obligation that we have on strategy. And so we're incredibly blessed. Our HR is actually called People and Culture. So our P&C team, they are navigating the natural transactional aspects of a human resources function, but we are all strategically minded to what are we trying to drive in terms of strategy, outcome, and forward-thinking planning for this new entity that's now just inaugurated 3 years old. And so we are continuing to identify across those 5 values, the enormity of the synergy between us, whether it's in the sustainability space, whether it's in the human rights compliance space. And so now what we're forming as we evolve and think about opportunity in year 3 is a culture steering committee. And that will be compliance, that will be people and culture, or HR, and that will be our HSE and quality organization. Because what we've naturally come to recognize is that we are all navigating the space of human behavior. Whether it's quality or safety, whether it's human resources, whether it's what we're trying to drive in terms of making the right decisions the first time always from an integrity perspective, it's about driving human behavior. And so that's what we're looking forward to capturing this year, is working more as a unit. And communications, I can't underestimate the criticality for a new company. And that's what we say, we're a startup. We may have had legacies that are well over 100 years old in its individual parts. We are now a startup that just inaugurated year 3. And the branding that is required to keep the energy up in this unified family about what this new consensus culture, message, strategy is, we simply couldn't accomplish without the partnership of communications as well.
I think it's so important, and I also think that the younger folks at work, I mean, I work with a particularly younger group of millennials. It's this sort of feeling that you understand what the values are of who you're working with and who you're working for, and that there's consistency in the messaging. I can't speak enough to how much I think that's going to be really important for setting up organizations for the future. I think we are past where I wanted to be on culture, so I think there might be some burning cultural questions out there, so let's take a couple questions on culture and then we'll move on to the next segment. Anybody? Sure.
So with what frequency did you measure culture post-acquisition?
One time, 56 questions, 800 people, I think. And I don't think you need to measure it more than once, quite frankly. It's a momentum, it's a snapshot. It gives you great insights, and you work on that. I mean, that's really the answer. I think we don't measure this part more than once. However, we do have annual employee surveys or pulse checks also. That's an annual activity in the company, and that would then include the acquired businesses as well.
Did you let the dust settle before you conducted the ethical culture survey? And if so, what was that cooling off period?
So depends on what acquisition you're talking about. I'd say for the larger ones, the data was generated during the due diligence phase also, and the cooling off would be at least a year, I would say, at least a year.
We did, sorry, turn over to the rest of the questions.
Sure.
This is for you, Natalia. If you could go back now, knowing what you know now, you could go back in time, you change one thing about the approach that you took in working with kids. Is there a particular area that you struggled with that you didn't anticipate before?
Yes, culture communication. So in year 2, there was a recognition that even though we have the beautiful diversity and inclusion of having the privilege of operating in over 45 countries around the world, you had significant culture origins that came from France and from the United States. And there have been lots of transactions between companies from those two countries that predate TechnipFMC, and there have been known challenges and opportunities. And so we recognized in year 2 that we were perhaps across the family, and I'm TechnipFMC. So I don't come from one part of the organization or another, and so I don't have a history of positive or negative baggage. But we have to recognize that people who had lived their career of 20 or 30 or 40 years did. And they may have been accustomed to communicating with a certain culture set in a certain way. So we actually hired an expert who advises all top French enterprise on how to communicate cross-culturally between France and the United States. When I heard this idea, I was offended. What do I mean by that? Somebody said to me, we would like you to be the guinea pig of a Franco-Anglo training. And I said, yeah, I didn't hear what you just said. Surely you mean multicultural. Surely you mean the beauty of the planet. Surely you mean all the diversity of what we bring. And they said, no, actually we mean very specifically the challenges between the French and the American culture. And it was a learning for me because I want to look at the planet through the mosaic that we are and not just those two unique cultures. But we had to confront a fact that there are beauties and distinctions, and we had to start to unfreeze some of the population. And so, begrudgingly, because I thought it was too culturally narrow, I took the training. And it was one of the best experiences of my life. If anybody wants to talk about the difference between a coconut and a peach, I'm happy to talk about that after the session. But it's just opportunity. How do we build bridges? How do we unfreeze? And so anybody going through a true marriage, merger, or even in the acquisition context, is a reverence for the diversity of culture that you are importing, and that there's probably opportunity with respect to learning how one another likes to operate, likes to communicate. It's not about one being better or worse. It's about how to connect.
Natalia, just a quick question. I understand you issue your code of ethics on day one, but not all the policies are not the integration of the system. You probably have, measure the strengths of each compliance program that you have until integrating the system. So, just out of curiosity, how long did it take you, and how was your blend in terms of percentage, or how much contribution came from Technip and how much from FMC?
So I would say the integration continues as the marriage continues to strengthen. It's a journey. I don't think it's ever done. But I said there were the best of the best, and there were nice synergies that didn't per se overlap in strength. So Legacy Technip had a very strong anti-bribery and corruption program, and Legacy FMC had a very strong trade compliance program with emphasis on sanctions and export controls. And so bringing those two together is what I mean by each had some space in the others, but they were symbiotically, we were able to stitch it. That said, I think, I mentioned the word bureaucracy earlier. Culturally, we had a part of the family that had a great reverence for the comfort it gave them in process. To a part of the family, process made them comfortable, process made them feel safe, process is how engineers think, and so process can solve all problem. Another part of the family said it's more about culture and values. It's more about quality of the personnel we hire, we trust people to make the right decision. Presumably, the old thinking of you learned your ethics at home, so we hire good people and we think they'll make the right decision. Neither one of those approaches is, we would probably all uniformly agree, is the right way, right? It needs to be an amalgamation of all of that. And so that's why it continues ongoing. So, within year one, there were certain policies and procedures that were stitched. By year and a half, there were others that are stitched and coming together. Here we are at the start of year 3, and now we're automating.
But adding to this, we have made the experience that if you acquire transcontinental, there may be legal differences, really. And I give you 2 examples, one in the insider trading area and one in the antitrust area. So you better check what regulations the acquired company has in place in terms of bundling products, for example, or in terms of disclosing share purchases. And if you see a delta that makes you uncomfortable, I would not wait a day, rather than really making sure that these are critical policies that need to be implemented ASAP. So these 2, for example, in one of our recent acquisitions were day one priorities. There are others where you may have less difference, perhaps even in antitrust and anti-corruption, there may be similar standards in place. So you can maintain a bit of a parallel world also for business continuity purposes, but I think you should really map the risks and tackle those that make you uncomfortable really rapidly.
This is not a question actually that we prepped for, but I'm just thinking about it. I wonder if, I know that in a lot of these sessions, there is a kind of focus on, how do we demonstrate ROI? ROI is always going to help us get more money. ROI is going to sort of elevate the profession and the table and the voice and all that stuff. I'm wondering if there's an M&A context, and you may or may not have had this experience, where maybe you acquire an organization that doesn't have a strong compliance team or a strong set of cultural values that promote ethics, and that by inserting that into the business over a certain number of years, you can actually see financially that the compliance, the employee retention, these types of things actually come back and make the dollars stronger, eliminating the gray markets. I mean, doing these kinds of things that, I don't know if anybody has a story like that, but as a person who's always curious about how to really show ROI, it occurs to me that might be a way to do it.
I mean, just anecdotally, I would share this. a year into the marriage, we had a principal client who came forward and said, "You're not showing up as one. You're still showing up as two." And that's devastation, right? That means we're not succeeding in acting like married partners. And so we undertook an idea jam, as our knowledge management experts call it, to really unpack, if we're going to get the ROI out of this marriage, then the culture is critical. And if we're not acting as sisters and brothers to one another, then you might as well cash out. And cashing out is not an option. So, I go back to the criticality of the strategy, the criticality of listening, and I think, in sailing parlance, tacking and turning along your course setting and adjusting to make sure that our people feel a connection to what we're calling them to serve and what we've promised to the stakeholder marketplace we intend to deliver through the marriage. And for us, it goes right back to the criticality of culture.
You could bring the ethics premium into play with the 11%, but I think that's not answering your question. I would approach it perhaps a bit differently. In looking at acquisitions that have failed, that's also, it's a negative ROI if you have the right of billions of euros or dollars. It's a negative ROI if you see enforcement all of a sudden, which you haven't had over the last decade. Avoiding these disasters, in my view, is also a KPI, and it is not easily measurable, but it's visible in the media and it's visible in your budget for external legal counsel and whatnot. And making sure that the transition is going on as expected, with the synergies, with the business potential as calculated, as the ROI the transaction is built upon, and there's no derailment or no deviation from those figures, I think is also a KPI that should steer your activities. And that's financial goal to some degree.
So SNC-Lavalin up to 2011 had a lot of corruption issues where we're actually still paying the price for today. So the ROI for us is actually fairly simple. Like, we know how it costs when you do something wrong. You're still paying for it today. Every company that we will acquire in the future also would also be linked indirectly to it as conditionally non-debarred. So the ROI for us is actually very easy because we know how much it costs if you do not do the right thing, right? So what we try to position ourselves and our team is, how can we actually help the business making the right decision? That actually means that we actually go out and meet with our clients. So we don't only meet with our employees, we actually go in front of their clients, everyone on the integrity team, meeting with them, explaining what we do, explaining their program, and so on, answering all their questions, their concerns. We do the same thing also with our business partner. There's no high-risk business partner that we don't meet with before we signed off on them. So the ROI came very easily to the business, that what we did had a value. So now when any of our clients is asking us about, our program, actually everyone now is pretty proud of what we have as a program, because they could say, this is our journey, this is what happened, and this is where we are now. And actually it becomes more and more for us a marketing point, where we could actually say in front of people, we've learned from our experience. We could actually, give you some of the lesson learned too as a company and share those things. So for us, it's actually pretty easy in that sense.
That's, it's also interesting, I think. I want to move a little bit to thinking about, if you're about to have M&A activity of some kind, how do you do that? Like, what does this preparation actually look like? To a point that I think Tom made earlier, there's planning, and then there's kind of also waiting and seeing what are the best parts that you can discover of the new organization that you can sort of merge those bests. Versus obviously you have to do quite a bit of careful planning. So maybe just some best practices for creating a framework in advance of M&A activity.
So in advance or post-closing, I think it depends on, is it an asset deal or is it a shared deal? If it's an asset deal, you have obviously more opportunity to look into the target. If it's a shared deal, for antitrust reasons, you may be a bit restricted, honestly, and not jumping the gun. So I would rather refer to post-closing activities, because we have done quite a few shared deals, and again, you have to honor hold separate mandates from the DOJ and so forth. What we usually build is a blended integration team, and that consists of several work streams. Just to give you a couple of examples. Policy integration, we mentioned this already. Training integration, system integration. I can tell you that training platforms are usually quite different. So merging them is key to have consistency in how you train people and how you track the training as well. Investigations, hotline. I mean, usually we disengage the hotline service provider of the target to move them into our system, which is also quite sophisticated in terms of assigning the investigation responsibility, doing this rapidly. That comes with communication, open reporting, open culture, built upon data points again. You can look, for example, into the number of cases reported and or confirmed in the target and compare this on a regional basis, on a divisional basis, on a subject matter basis with your own data. And if you see, on the aggregate, you have only 50% of reports compared to your business, and really apples and apples being compared, and only 20% confirmed, there may be a reason for this. Open reporting, lack of capacity, tone from the top, and these are, again, insights that you need to utilize rapidly to bring them into your scope. So these post-transactional integration work streams are really critical. Again, blended with folks from us and folks from the target company, and then moving under a time frame, I would say, of roughly a year, because you also need to consider, especially from an anti-corruption perspective, the DOJ's expectation to your company to be proactive and identify issues that may have not been surfaced in the target. There is an opinion, non-binding, by the DOJ of 1402, which I recommend reviewing to avoid successor liability on anti-corruption issues. And they don't give you a time frame. It should be reasonable. I would submit it should not be lengthier than a year to really have those insights. So in terms of building the framework, that's how we approach it.
I agree with everything Tom said. I would just add one step that we took. So coming together in the marriage, each company had its own outside preferred providers, and those providers are loyal and they are knowledgeable with respect to their client. We brought in on day one a completely new law firm partner. And the purpose of that relationship, establishing on day one, was to further the perspective that this is a new entity, this is a startup entity, and somebody who would come with a fresh perspective, no bias with respect to which client or which program they were previously supporting, so that they could support the message of the strategy of the leadership team and inculcate that further with the compliance teams, that we're starting to come together in those integration teams.
I would add for us that, obviously, I agree with everything they said, but I would add for us that our program is really risk-based, right? So there was a great breakout session yesterday on risk management. So because it's risk-based, we already identify what are the higher risk for our organization. So we ensure that those risks would be looked at ASAP as day one of when it is official that it is acquired. For us, it was every dealing that they had with agents and sponsors. So we did a complete compliance review, including books and record, interviews and so on those agents and sponsors that this company had. And we actually, out of the 24 that they had, we cut half of them because we were not satisfied that they would, be able to comply with our expectation. So then this, another deal of dealing with legal, commercial, and so on, how to do these things. But I think that this is one thing that is important to do. If in your business, in your industry, you've already identified what are the higher risks, those actually should be your priority on day one after. And then after that, obviously, everything goes into it. But I would say that, as you said, a year is actually very ambitious sometimes, but you need to do it. Because if within that year something happens, you're still liable for it. So you might as well, hurry up, put the resource necessary to be able to do that. Communicate as much as possible. Find ways for the message to be sent out there as much as possible.
And I would also suggest document what you're doing. So we also partner with external firms to bring this into a system. There are software tools available to really generate these logs or journals, because God forbid something is being detected, you want to be absolutely transparent and convincing that you've done the right thing, that you have dedicated these resources, that you've looked into the issues, you have not neglected anything, you've been open and transparent about it, and you've remedied what you've seen by process improvements and whatsoever. And having this track record in writing, it could be really critical to defend the company, avoid successful liability, and so forth.
Yeah, that's another point I wanted to talk about, and I think it'll be the last one, and then we'll do some more questions about technology. I mean, I think it is another major area. Everybody knows that getting good technology to support the program is increasingly important. Because of, again, where I sit, we actually deal with a lot of end clients that have recently had an acquisition or merger, because it's often a good moment to sort of look at what you have, and maybe there's a lot of fragmentation and data silos and things like that. And in every compliance conference that I go to, it's all about machine learning and AI and predictive analytics and all these very sexy topics that you can't do if your data is not integrated. And so that's problematic generally, even without M&A activity, but then particularly when you add to it the M&A activity. So I guess the question would be, does M&A activity present a great moment to evaluate what you're doing to support your program technologically, or is it just too much of an overwhelming time and that has to be later?
I think it's a huge opportunity. But make no mistake, you need the mindset to seize that opportunity and say, what everybody had before was, fine, what it was. But again, startup mindset, you innovate, you change at a speed of on average every 7 to 9 months, not the typical pace of change for a company that may be in existence for over 60 years. So stay committed to that and bring the innovation. And then you get a nice alignment with what do we need to do to address our risks, knowing what those are, bringing innovation to the table in alignment with the innovation of the culture, in our context for a new organization.
I agree. I would almost say it's not just an opportunity, it is a necessity, really. I think you're having a lot of inefficiencies in the system if you're not mapping your process and tech landscape, and if you're not migrating them. I would say, however, also you need to be ready before you migrate them, because it's a matter of business continuity. I cannot just turn off access to the hotline without really having a process in place that substitutes this. I cannot take off the third-party approval system unless I know if they migrate into our system, they get the approvals within the same amount of time as before and don't have to wait for 4 weeks. So I think, again, it's an opportunity, it's a necessity, but you need to be really clear that you have your systems scaled up, that the new business can come in without technical bugs whatsoever, because that's disruptive to the business, and that could be a huge, I think, also risk for the credibility of your function. Business continuity is usually also something that kind of plays a role in all these assessments. Otherwise, you're just vision or in reality, really.
So I agree that it's an opportunity, but I have a but. Okay, so depending on the acquisition, depending on how many employees, depending on what they had in the past versus what you have, depending on the capacity also for people accepting change and being able to operationalize that change too, you need also to take that into consideration. So you might want to change your technology, like the whistleblowing line. We did that very quickly. So, you know, low-hanging fruits. We do have a system in place where we do all our due diligence for all of our suppliers and business partner. That one, we actually do want to change it because we've kind of noticed also after doing that gap analysis that we needed to improve it, and the provider that we have in place is, you know, whatever. That's another discussion. But my point is that we've looked at what we need to change. So now we're looking for a different platform to be able to integrate every best practice that they had, that we have, to consolidate that together. But changing a software like using for the compliance due diligence, it's not something that you change in a month. It's sometimes some things that takes, like I think we had a discussion, could take up to 9 to 12 months to just to be able to integrate, and that's without an acquisition. So imagine when you actually have also 18,000 new employees, you also need to understand the capacity of accepting a change and being able to digest it and being able also to put it in action after. So yes, think about it, but plan it. Don't go, you know, blindly in it as, oh, we'll change everything at the same time. There's a capacity of accepting change as a human. We're all human, right? So we need also to understand that point.
No, that makes good sense. So I think we're out of time, but if anybody has a burning question, we'll do it. And if not, then just pop up here. Yeah? Thank you so much.